All right, good afternoon again. We're delighted to be joined by our friend and colleague Imran Riza, who is our resident humanitarian coordinator in Lebanon. So it's hard sometimes to follow where you are, Imran, but please go ahead, then we'll take some questions.
Okay, how do I turn this on?
Don't worry,
It's on?
You don't need to do it.
Okay. Listen, thank you. Very happy to be with you and very happy to be talking about Lebanon because basically we've had, I think, a sort of compounding set of multiple crises over the last 4 years. The World Bank describes it as one of the 10 worst financial and economic crises since the mid-19th century. So you've got a situation in Lebanon where in the last 4 years, the needs across all populations has increased dramatically. Before that, of course, and still going on, is the displacement of Syrians. So that burden, and Syrians are much worse off now than they were before, also in that sense. So to put that together with having just had the SDG summit here, and what do you do in terms of moving ahead with development in a context like that, and try to accelerate things. There are areas that we found where we are discussing concrete immediate medium-term reforms in areas such as food systems, health, education, social protection, all in a caretaker mode of the ministers, of the ministries. And we are trying to get involvement of not just the government donors in the UN, but also civil society and parliamentarians in that. So these sorts of discussions are actually happening when overall you've got a huge set of increasing humanitarian needs, but we do understand, I think, collectively over there, that reforms need to take place. So we're trying to push as much as we can on that front. The macro reforms that I think most of you are that follow Lebanon are aware of, the IMF staff level agreement, the prior actions that were agreed about 1.5 years ago, I think are still subject to the political impasse that's still there. There is no president, there is a caretaker government. We are not getting movement on the macro reforms at this point, enough movement on it, which of course also affects development financing at this time. So for us, it's trying to address needs as much as possible, and from my resident coordinator side as well as the humanitarian coordinator side, a lot of it is about humanitarian assistance and stabilization assistance, and trying to be as efficient and focused as possible, but at the same time working with the government to try to increase the movement on particular reforms that are achievable even in this period of political vacuum that's existing. So I think I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you.
And happy to answer any questions.
Edie?
Mr. Riza, thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of questions. Could you give us some figures on the latest numbers of Lebanese and Syrians who need assistance, and how much the appeals have or have not been filled? And as I understand it, the root of a lot of this is the political crisis in the country. Does that show any sign at all of being resolved? And that seems to be key. And do you see Syrian refugees who fled to Lebanon going back? Thank you.
Simple questions. Thank you. No, in terms of numbers, it has increased a great deal, the level of need, and we estimate that there are some 3.9 million people in need in Lebanon. That includes 2.1 million Lebanese, 180,000 Palestine refugees, over 31,000 Palestine refugees from Syria, migrants, 81,000, and about 1.5 million Syrians. So if you think about the scale of Lebanon, that's a lot of people in need. And the food insecurity has increased a great deal. WFP has been providing figures on that recently. So everything is on a negative track, let's put in that sense, in terms of needs, in terms of the humanitarian situation. The appeals have not, I mean, we over the past year, let's look at 2022, we got more or less about 40% of what we asked for, and I think that is similar this year, the trend so far. But overall, the resources are really going down and the needs are increasing. So it's something that we're facing globally. In a situation like Lebanon, it doesn't have the attention that some other situations have. And so we are extremely concerned about it. What has also happened is that you've got quite a failure of institutions happening over the last 4 years, given the financial, the economic crisis, and the halt, in a sense, of some of the financing due to the lack of reform. So again, it sort of prioritizes the need for reforms, which also relates to what you were saying about the overall situation of a political impasse. Is there anything that's going forward on that? And we're looking very much at the efforts that are being made by the quintet at this point. They had a meeting here, also in the margins of the high-level week. And we wait and we hope that there is a solution, but it is now going to over a year without a president, a caretaker government, and so a lot of the institutions really are not working at this time. In terms of refugees, you asked about Syrians. The priority, of course, remains that one needs a political solution. That is essential along the lines of 2254. That's what Geir Pedersen, the special envoy, has been pushing on. Certainly also from their sides, the High Commissioner for Refugees, the Emergency Relief Coordinator. Everyone is working on efforts to find solutions. At the moment, we're not seeing too much light on that side at all. And instead, what we're seeing is a more tense situation within Lebanon, and I think we also all heard what King Abdullah had to say at the General Assembly about the situation in Jordan. So hosting countries that have been incredibly generous in terms of hospitality, in terms of reception, are straining a bit with it. I mean, the crisis that I was talking about the last 4 years in Lebanon is not due to the Syrians. That is due to all sorts of other issues. But it certainly makes it much more difficult, and there's a great deal of pressure at this time on Syrians and on the international community as well.
Thank you. Ephraim, Arab News.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mr. Riza. Even before the political vacuum, this has been the case for 4 years. When there was a president, it was even more complicated to get any of the reforms started. The World Bank has been calling for it, IMF as well. In the beginning, it was a host of reforms they were asking for. Then they were asking for just one reform, and they weren't even getting that. So how confident are you that this immediate small-scale reforms are being taken seriously by this political class? And have we seen any actual results so far? Anything that has actually begun on those reforms? Thanks.
There's certainly been discussion. There have been a number of moves that we've heard, but they haven't gone far enough. There was an IMF mission, I think, just a couple of weeks ago that concluded, and again, we are not getting really to, or they are not getting to the point that's needed on that. The reforms I'm talking about are more sectoral ones that we are trying to focus on far more efficiency, let's say, and targeting in areas like education, health, because they've been quite bloated sectors that a lot of the international community of donors have had a lot of issues with over the past. And as you're saying, it's not something that's just the last year. It's not something that's just the last 4 years. It's much longer than that this is built up. So in a way, I mean, we all say that in crises you look for opportunities. And here at this time, we're looking very much to the partners, both governmental and non-governmental, that can push some very practical reforms in these sectors and move ahead. A number of the ministries have come up with sort of 5-year strategies. Some of those are a bit too ambitious, but there are certainly elements in it that in a short and medium term we should be able to achieve if we have the right monitoring, the right sort of safeguarding of contributions that come in and try and impact there.
Thank you. Maggie?
Hi, Mr. Riza, thank you. Just wondering, you gave a lot of numbers to Edie on people in need. How many are you actually reaching? And are you seeing a lot of formerly middle-class Lebanese reaching out for assistance now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of our biggest worries is what's happening to the middle class and what's happening to youth as well. I mean, there is a real attempt at an outflow for many of the young people to actually become part of the diaspora rather than staying in Lebanon. There's a lack of confidence at this time. In terms of reaching last year, it's more or less about even. It's about 1 million Syrians that we reached with assistance, and slightly less than that, about 950,000 Lebanese. So the assistance that's being provided is quite balanced in that way. It is far less than what's needed, than the numbers that I gave earlier. So there's a shortage not just in the number of people that we can reach with assistance, but also the amount of assistance that we're giving. It's much less than the minimum survival level basket that we normally have.
And does the Syrian refugee population express to you any concerns about pressure to return home? Is it growing on them from the local community and the government?
I think that the Syrian refugees, I mean, at the moment, if you're following what's happening in Lebanon, there is a lot of very negative rhetoric. There is a lot of disinformation. There is and it raises tensions, and of course it raises worries amongst the Syrian refugees that are there. In terms of their intent to repatriate, I don't think anything has really changed fundamentally. We know that there are aspects that are related to perceptions of safety, security, housing, land and property, how certain things happen. Sometimes you hear a lot about military service and the like, but also you hear about education, you hear about livelihoods, you hear about water, you hear about electricity. So at the moment what we hear from refugees is that the vast majority do want to return, but not quite yet.
Thank you. Adla and then Stefano.
Hi, Adla Masood from The National. How do you deal with when you have Lebanese politicians that call Syrians an existential threat? How do you deal with this misinformation?
By trying to do what I'm doing right now with you, is get some of the actual facts across of overall needs, of our responding on the basis of needs, not of status or a population, and of the actual total amount of assistance. Because, for example, last year, we had a great deal of support to the Ministry of Education, to the Ministry of Health, to the Ministry of Social Affairs, to the Ministry of Interior and municipalities. So at this time, despite everything that's happening, we have been trying to support local institutions as much as possible. The whole design of the response to the Syrian displacement from 2014, 2015. I mean, obviously it started in 2011, but the real framework that came into play was around 2014-15. It focused not just on assistance to Syrians, but very much to the host communities and to the institutions that are affected. And that did extremely well, I think, up till 2019, when you had a series of new crises evolving and this impoverishment of Lebanese after that. And that's the current situation we're in. If it's manipulated by different actors on the scene, that is, for us, incredibly negative. It raises tensions. It's not helpful at all. So we are trying to counter it as much as possible, using facts and using the reality on the ground.
Thank you. Stefano Vaccaro?
Yes, Stefano Vaccaro, Voce di New York. It's about UNIFIL. It's one of the most important mission that the UN has out there. You worked for it, and the Security Council had just renewed the mandate. And for your work now, how do you interact with the mission? How does it help, if it helps, or if you interact at all? And because there was also a problem recently, it's not anymore. It looks like it's not anymore welcome the way it was. The mission was welcome in the past. Do you think there is a danger that things could escalate in southern Lebanon?
I think UNIFIL has, over the years, shown. I mean, there have been different periods of tension and less tension, and what the relationship with the local population has been. It's been many, many years, and it's actually a very strong, I think there's a strong appreciation of UNIFIL within Lebanon. There may be momentary things at particular points, but what you're talking about in terms of fears of escalation, I think UNIFIL is essential in order to try to manage those fears and manage the tensions that are there, and that's where it's been quite successful. In terms of, and I'm not with UNIFIL anymore, I'm the resident coordinator, humanitarian coordinator. From my perspective, what it is about making sure that the UN country team and our partners are now somehow addressing a lot of the needs that are also in the south because of this overall impoverishment. Earlier, you didn't have very many refugees in the south, so there wasn't as much focus. But now, with what's happened to Lebanese, there is a lot more need, and so there's much more presence also from the UN country team in working in the south. And if we're doing that, of course, it has to be in good coordination with particularly the civil affairs part of UNIFIL.
Thank you very much. Imran, thank you. And we'll see you back here soon, hopefully.